Hello, welcome back to the Curious Confucian, your unapologetic, unfiltered Asian activist. Okay, the topic we're going to explore today is should people of color, should non European people feel grateful for colonization? Should the Asians, the Africans, the Latinos, the Native Americans, wait, they're kind of the same thing, right? The Aboriginal Australians, and so on and so forth, be grateful for Western colonization. Because let's face it, while the noble, colonization was really an awful thing, you must admit, if you are being honest, objective, and unbiased, that the white man brought many great things to the lesser breeds of humanity, such as the beautiful language of Shakespeare, rule of law, democracy, freedom of speech, and simply superior Western values in order to elevate the status of those half devil, half child native barbarians. Yes. We're often told time and again, whenever we bring up institutionalized racism, or we bring up the after effects of colonization, we're constantly being told that we should be grateful. We ungrateful, malcontent ingrates, because despite the fact that colonization was awful, colonialism was awful, it was exploitative, it was basically, awful. We have to look at the bigger picture and realize that colonialism was overall positive for the non-European people. And you see a lot of this kind of white fragility on and a very easy way to trigger this sort of white fragility is when you simply call Churchill a racist. Churchill's grandson even said that, stern action should be taken against people who hold such odious views that Churchill was a racist. It's deeply offensive. Deeply offensive. So the funny thing is, to these people, it's more deeply offensive that their hero was called a racist than the fact that Churchill referred to Indians as a beastly race, referred to Arabs as dung-eating savages, referred to Chinese people like myself as slant-eyed chinks, and of course, referred to Aboriginal Australians and Native Americans as a dog in the manger, who have simply been replaced by a higher grade, more worldly wise race. Yeah, so we're not supposed to be offended by what Churchill said, but at the same time, we're supposed to keep our traps shut and not express our offense at what Churchill said, because it will offend the delicate cream cracker sensitivities of all his progeny and all the people living in the proudly Western people of Western civilization. It will offend those people's sensitivities. I'm going to put a link in the description box of what Churchill's grandson's snowflakey tirade against all the people who call his grandfather a racist. Even though, to me, that's silly, because Churchill was objectively racist, just like, the grass is objectively green, and the sky is objectively blue, and this shirt is objectively red. So to call Churchill a racist is a historical fact, right? It's not something facts. I hate to quote Ben Shapiro. I really do not like Ben Shapiro, as he is an extremely dangerous Western chauvinist. But to quote Ben Shapiro, facts do not care about your feelings. So anyway. Oftentimes, when people of color want to talk about institutionalized racism, they want to talk about how colonial narratives have shaped the world we live in. We want to talk about how white supremacy is linked with colonial narratives and how white supremacy still hurts us today. Oftentimes, we get a tirade of very, very angry, defensive white people telling us that we should be grateful because the British colonists or the European colonists brought superior Western civilization, like rule of law, education, superior education, the superior English language, and all these sorts of things. And as a matter of fact, I got into an argument with a couple of boomer expats in Malaysia themselves, merely for asking the innocent question, just an innocent question, does Britain owe its former colonies reparations? It's just an innocent question. I didn't even say that Britain necessarily did owe reparations. I did not even state that I agreed that Britain owed its former colonies reparations. I was merely reiterating a question that Shashi Tharoor, the Indian academic, asked. Does Britain owe its former colonies reparations? And I got a slew of boomer expats in Malaysia from the West attacking me with things like, I noticed that you still use your Mat Saleh name, because my name on my profile is Christopher, or, oh, you hate the West, you do not understand freedom and democracy and all, or why can't you look at the bigger picture, or the Britain owes nothing, people who blame the West for what they did in the past and are not just, these people have failed to progress on with the times and are blaming others for their failure. And all this defensiveness at just one question, just a simple question. Does Britain owe reparations? It's like when I asked the question, does Japan owe reparations for its behavior in China? You don't see like Japanese people responding the same way, with the same degree of aggressiveness, the same degree of defensiveness. I believe there's a term called white fragility, in fact, is whenever you call out systems of white supremacy, or whenever you call out, even mentioning the word white privilege is enough to trigger people into a defensive fury, yeah, I guess it's because we, for the last 200 years, people of color have not actually had much of a voice. Because, let's face it, English being the international language due to British colonization, very few of us could actually counter Orientalist narratives. Like, Anna Leonowens, when she wrote that book, The Governess in the Siamese Court. That book is filled with Orientalist falsehoods. It's filled with biases against West Asian culture, Thai culture specifically, because it's seen through a very, very ethnocentric Western lens. But Thai people in the past could not counter this narrative. Sure, they can ban that book in the West, but they couldn't counter Anna Leonowens' narrative because they did not have the language skills to counter that false narrative of Thailand, right? But nowadays, because we Asians learned English, or we Asians and Africans and everyone else, we learned English. It was not bestowed upon us as some gift of the West, mind you. It was enforced on us, just like the British enforced English on the Irish. When we learned it, we mastered it. It was not done, because as a form of tribute to the British Empire. We did it as a weapon by which we could escape colonization, and now we have. So recently, if you think Asians and Africans, people of color, are a lot more vocal than before, you see the word critical race theorist being thrown around a lot. Suddenly everyone seems to be an expert. All these people in the West seem to be experts on the term critical race theory, despite the fact that I doubt most of them even know what it means. They it seems to me that whenever people of color want to discuss issues which concern them, you can bet you're gonna get slagged with either Marxist critical race theorists or you know or just basically a whiner or snowflake, whatever. But when you, in contrast, when you actually call a supposedly great figure, when you call out the bad behavior of a supposedly great figure in the West like Churchill, then you'll see who the real snowflakes are. But the general presupposition is that, you know, we people of color owe the West. We owe it to Western civilization. Now, they don't owe us anything, but we don't. We owe them everything for the standard of living that we now enjoy, and that colonialism, while it was awful, brought an overall positive effect to Asia. And I'm here to tell you that, dear old guard defenders of Western civilization, I do not owe you or your Churchill a damn thing, I've often been attacked for not seeing the bigger picture about Churchill, for apparently only focusing on his racism, but not anything else, according to my detractors, the proud boys and firm defenders of Western civilization. And all right, since you want me to analyze Churchill not just on his odious views on race, since you guys apparently don't like snowflake cancel culture of the left, I will give you my full, unfiltered opinion about your hero, Sir Winston Churchill. Just get a box of tissues for yourself, yeah? Because when I go full out, I don't actually I don't pull punches. I don't pull linguistic punches. So yeah. You see, Churchill was so much more than just a racist piece of shit who boasted about shooting Africans, wantonly starved 3 million Indians to death, and deported thousands of Chinese soldiers who had helped the Allies to win the war. Since he hypocritically believed that Britain should be kept white, but at the same time he also paradoxically believed that Caucasian people should have the right to live in Asia and Africa if they please. I think they call that colonialism. That's right. Yeah, I can't come to your shores, but you have every right to come over to my shores. Because when I come over to your shores, I sort of degenerate your beautiful Western civilization. But when you come to my shores in Asia, you uplift my people, you uplift my civilization with your Aryan values. You see, Churchill was not just a degenerate racist, he was also an incompetent fool who screwed up big time at Gallipoli but didn't have the guts to commit seppuku, pardon the pun, a privileged jit whose position was bought and paid for by his rich daddy, as was common for the cream cracker rich boys at the time, who lost both Singapore and Hong Kong to men he would regard as racially inferior, rice-eating, slant-eyed midgets. Now, if there's just one thing that I can respect about Churchill, it's the fact that the man wasn't a pussy about his bigotry. He was out and open about his bigotry. So, but when you're boozed up half the time, you tend to be a lot more straightforward and honest, don't you? And no. With or without Churchill, let me tell you, the Axis still would have lost the war due to Hitler and Hirohito's sheer tactical incompetence. To say that Churchill is solely responsible for winning World War II is like saying that Raffles created Singapore. It is treating history through an extremely narcissistic and self-aggrandizing Anglo sort of lens. No one seems to remember, for instance, that it was the Russians who cornered Hitler in his bunker. But everyone seems to be giving Churchill the credit for being the man who saved the world from fascism. I mean, why the hell should I be grateful to Churchill? Like, when he was fighting the Axis, he wasn't doing it for me or for anyone else who wasn't European. He wasn't thinking about us. He was doing it for the future of all the nice white boys and girls of the Western democracies, not for worthless, stinking, slant-eyed shinks like myself, or beastly Indians, or subhuman Africans and Aborigines. Now, if the Jews of Germany, suppose hypothetically, were black or brown, do you think Churchill would give any much of a shit about them? I mean, he was a man who purposefully diverted supplies away from Bengal, who refused, Commonwealth calls for help in Bengal, who slept just as soundly as any other night, knowing that he'd be starving millions of Indians to death. Responding that it was the Indians' fault that they were in this position themselves for breeding like rabbits. When the Japanese were making their way to Hong Kong, Churchill declined Chiang Kai-shek's offer to send reinforcements because he did not want Hong Kong to fall into Chinese hands and would rather it fall into Japanese hands. Yeah, that's right, you Hong Kong protesters, you Churchill-loving cucks. Your hero, Sir Winston Churchill, whom you thought loved you as much as he loved his fellow white people, was willing to surrender you to the mercy of the Imperial Japanese Army because he considered you, in his words, not mine, the Chinese, to be a barbarian race and a menace to civilized nations. I'm going to put a link in the description to that interview that he made about the perpetual partition of China in 1902. Yeah? And even the Peranakan Chinese of Malaya, and Singapore. The Peranakan Chinese who proudly considered themselves Queen's Chinese for having such an impeccable flair for the English language, for their supreme loyalty to crown and country, to the British Empire, and their Western lifestyle and worldview, like my late grandfather, God bless his soul. Even they understood very soon that in Churchill's racial hierarchy, they were not special. They were just chinks to him, same like the rest of us. After all, they too were left behind to the mercy of the Japanese, while the British colonials evacuated their own people out of Singapore and left the locals out of the loop. In fact, it was actually the Japanese occupation that served as the catalyst for our struggle for independence and self-determination from British rule. The Japanese made us realize that the British Empire was not infallible, and white men like Churchill were not gods. So when the Brits came back in 1945 and tried to lord it over us like they'd always done, you can imagine how goddamn pissed off we were at them. So yeah, I don't owe you or your drunken fool Churchill or your Western civilization a damn thing. The Palestinians who are now under Israeli occupation, which your hero endorsed, do not owe your hero a damn thing. The Indians do not owe your hero a damn thing. And in fact, if anything, if we're going to talk about owing people anything, you owe me for all the menial, underpaid work my ancestors did for you to keep your mighty, whitey British Empire afloat for the advancement of your opium-pushing nation at the expense of mine. There? Happy?